Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. Today, we're going to be breaking down every position group and assessing whether or not we would be attacking that need if we were a team in that position through free agency or through the draft. So let's get things rolling. And at the quarterback position, Alex, if you were a team in need of a starting quarterback, trying to get your franchise quarterback, what direction would you look in this offseason? Because we know it's going to be a jam-packed offseason. The quarterback carousel is like in no other year. So where would you be looking?
So the first thing I think we should probably do is list out some of the free agents. So some of the notable free agents, quarterback, Dak Prescott. Most likely he's going to be re-signed by the Cowboys. I don't really see how they let him walk this year. If anything, I think it would be next year if they have to tag him this year. Mitchell Trubisky, Jameis Winston, Cam Newton, Andy Dalton, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Tyrod Taylor. Those are the most notable names. So right off the bat, I think that's going to kind of lead you to what we think a team's going to have to do. So if not through free agency, obviously trade might be another option. So Deshaun Watson, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr. So especially with quarterback, to me, this kind of splits off into two directions. If you're in position to draft one of the top four quarterbacks, so probably 1 through 10 draft spot, you draft one. If not, you're going to have to trade for one. So you're going to have to give up a lot of draft capital to trade for Deshaun Watson, maybe Jimmy G. I would look at Sam Darnold. I think he's a good option for teams in the later half of the first round that need a quarterback. So where would you go?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you. I think more than any other position group, it's really a team-by-team basis. It's like, where are you in the draft order? What's your situation with your starter right now? Because, again, like you said, that free agency class, I know some people may want to take a shot on Mitch Trubisky. I do think the Saints should go with Jameis Winston. And so I don't expect him to be available, and I don't think any of the other free agents, Dak Prescott aside, because I think he's going to be a Dallas Cowboy. And shout out to our newest member on the team, Zeke, who just put up an article detailing the Dak situation on our website at eastwestfootballnetwork.com. So make sure to check that out. But I really think that if you're in the top 10, as you said, you should be going for a quarterback. For me, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields are going to be franchise quarterbacks. Trey Lance, if you get maybe if you do get a free agent quarterback in order to be his mentor, maybe of Ryan Fitzpatrick or a Tyrod Taylor or someone who can really bridge that gap while you develop Trey Lance, because he was a 1-year FCS starter, so he does need that development. And once you get that underway, so maybe then you do go get a quarterback to make the bridge for Trey Lance. But the tricky situation is those teams that need a quarterback that are sitting there in the 20s in the draft, the Chicago Bears, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New Orleans Saints. It's really tricky on what they do, and they probably would have to give up some draft capital to get one of those trade targets you mentioned.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on what you said about Trey Lance a little bit. If I were a team, I'm assuming you're going to have to be in the top 10 to take Lance. That's all the reports are coming out saying top 4 QBs in the top 10. Besides the Panthers, if I was the Panthers, obviously you have Bridgewater, you can draft Lance, let him sit. But if I was another team that was interested in Lance, obviously he's not a guy that you can have start this year. I would look at Cam Newton just because it's a similar playing style. I think if you're bringing in one of these free agents, you're not going to be very good. But I think you're going to need a really good head coach that can sell the fans and say, look, Trey Lance is just not ready to play yet. He needs a year to develop. But I think Cam Newton would be an intriguing option because the playing style is similar. Obviously, Newton's arm has gone down a lot, but I just think Newton's almost run first, like what he does when he's running an offense. I think he would be able to teach an offense to Trey Lance and, sign Newton for a year and then bring up Lance to start next year.
I can't say I agree, because I think with Trey Lance, you need a quarterback that's going to be able to play a full year as the starting quarterback while you develop Lance, because I think Lance does need that full year to sit out and develop. And Cam Newton did not play anywhere near a starting level in 2020. He was really a disastrous performance from him throughout the season, and I don't think that you can afford to have him on the field for that long, because your fans and your organization are going to be screaming to put in Trey Lance, and you don't want to rush his development. And at the same time, I think you need a guy who can really stay a whole year.
Steve, my one thing is you don't want to bring in a quarterback that's too far off in skill set. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick's a good idea, but then you're switching the offense completely. Ryan Fitzpatrick's old, and nothing against him. He can't run around. He has a complete opposite skill set of Trey Lance. So I just feel like if you plan on drafting Lance, you bring in Fitzpatrick to run the offense for a year, I don't think you're using the full potential that Lance has to use that full first year to develop. I think the best opportunity would be if you can run an offense that Lance would then run the next year. So maybe another option would be Tyrod Taylor. Again, he might not be able to start. He might not have starting quality reps the whole year, but I think that's what you're going to have to deal with. Any of these free agent quarterbacks besides Prescott, I think you all run a high risk of not being able to get 16 starting quality games from them. So I think that's just going to be a pill you have to swallow regardless.
No, I really think that you should be targeting Trey Lance if you're a team that's, say, the Carolina Panthers and you have Teddy Bridgewater, or you're the San Francisco 49ers and you have Jimmy Garoppolo. You have that guy that's really not a top 15 quarterback in the league, but you can keep him as a starter for a full year while you develop Trey Lance, because I would rather switch up the offense that following offseason and really tailor it to Lance's strengths, because he's such a great dual threat, than rush him in when he's not ready in his first year. If you're choosing between swallowing the pill of having to rush him in early or swallowing the pill of having to switch up the offense, and I would transition the offense after his rookie year in order to tailor it to his strengths, because that's what I would do.
Yeah, I understand that. For me, it's just I would obviously Lance can't start. He can't start. It's going to ruin him if he starts year one. He just has too big of a leap to make. I just feel like it would be really beneficial to have an offense that he can learn, because he's learning at North Dakota State. He's not learning of anywhere close to an NFL offense. So imagine trying to have him learn an offense his rookie year, and then the next offseason learn a second offense that's almost completely different.
It doesn't have to be completely different, though. You can already start evolving the offense while you have your bridge quarterback, even if he's not completely suited to that play style, and then just evolve it even more in the offseason. I just don't think you should run the risk of getting him too early in there, because if you're taking a Tyrod Taylor or a Cam Newton, what if your owner calls you in week 7 and says, "Look, he's absolutely stinking up the joint every week. Put Lance in there." What do you do?
But then I get that we can have him go to a team that, has a middle of the road quarterback like Bridgewater or Garoppolo. But what about all these other teams? What if the Bears could somehow, jump up to the top 10 to maybe take Trey Lance? What do you do if you're the Bears?
Well, I think that's the thing with my evaluation of Trey Lance. He's not for everyone. You need the right situation. So I wouldn't be targeting a jump in which you have to give up maybe a first round pick, and then you also have to resolve that issue that you just brought up. I think we can move on from the Trey Lance discussion, but I think that you have to be the right team with the right situation.
Yeah, I think maybe we can touch on some of the possible trades this offseason, because I think this season more than ever it's just crazy with the trades. We already saw, the Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff trade, and there's plenty of quarterbacks that have been talked about and rumored in trade talks. Obviously, Deshaun Watson said he wants to be traded. Jimmy Garoppolo his name's been tossed around a little bit. Derek Carr, although the Raiders say they're keeping him, they say he's not available for trade. But I mean, you never know with John Gruden. And then Carson Wentz and Sam Darnold.
I think there's going to be a good amount of movement, but there might be less than we expect. I think Deshaun Watson is going to be staying put. That might be a hot take, but I simply do not think anyone's going to be meeting the demands of the Houston Texans. He may even hold out if that happens. There's been some buzz about that. I think that a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo might end up staying in San Francisco, even though the media is really making you think he's unwanted there. But they went to the Super Bowl with him. I think they might maybe target Trey Lance, or maybe they really just build around Garoppolo because that offense is really talented. And so at the end of the day, I do think Sam Darnold's going to get traded. I think there's going to be several pieces, but maybe I'll be wrong. But I don't think it's going to be quite as eventful as we think. But it's definitely way more eventful than a normal quarterback offseason.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Texans are staying put on not trading Watson right now, and I really think it would be a mistake. I think you have to keep him as long as you possibly can, even if he says he's not going to play. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to play. You cannot trade him until he sits out that first week.
Fire Jack Easterby. Just do it. Just do it. He's not qualified for his job, and Watson would be much happier if he was fired.
I mean, I agree. I think anyone with a good head on their shoulders would say fire Jack Easterby, but clearly that's not what Cal McNair wants to do. For whatever reason, Jack Easterby has just completely blinded him from what is actually going on, and Easterby is telling him some false narrative about how Easterby is not the problem when everyone knows that he is. And I think that's going to be that's the problem with Watson. I think that was part of the problem with Watt. I think that's going to cause them problems bringing in free agents. So Houston's really a mess, and I don't see any way out of it other than firing Jack Easterby, which I don't think they're going to do.
Yeah, I agree. And now one last quarterback situation before we move on to the next position group. The Raiders, as you said, Derek Carr, there's been some buzz about him getting traded. Also been buzz about Marcus Mariota getting traded. What do you think happens in that quarterback room this offseason? Because that's an intriguing storyline.
So everybody loves to hate on Derek Carr, and I don't think he's by any means anywhere close to a top 5 quarterback, but I think he's progressed and gotten better each year in this John Gruden offense. So I think it would be a mistake to trade Derek Carr right now because I don't see them in position to get an upgrade at quarterback.
Yes.
So I just think they should stick with Derek Carr. Maybe somehow he regains that,
2017 maybe?
2016 or 20, whenever he was in the MVP conversation. I think it was 2016. I could be wrong. But if he could regain that form again, and then you'd look like a fool for trading him. I think late in the offseason, I think Marcus Mariota is going to get traded. I think he's a good backup quarterback, but I just think they can get some value for him. I think he's shown enough to be able to fight for a starting job again, and I don't think that's going to happen in Las Vegas. So I just think they could get some good value for Mariota, but I don't think it's going to happen now. It's going to happen later down the line where somebody's not happy with their quarterback situation, don't want to give high draft picks up and say, hey, let's take a flyer on Marcus Mariota, have him compete for the starting job.
Yeah, actually, talking about Trey Lance earlier, I would prefer giving up something for Marcus Mariota and having him as the bridge than Tyrod Taylor or Cam Newton. That could actually be an intriguing option. I think that Derek Carr is the type of quarterback where you aren't actively searching for an upgrade over him, but if you ever were in a position, be it probably by the draft, where there's a quarterback you think is a surefire franchise quarterback, and yet he's sitting right there, the presence of Derek Carr should not stop you from taking him. You should not be from taking that upgrade. So that's just my view on Derek Carr, and right now they don't really have that option, so I would stick with him for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think people just love to hate on Derek Carr because of the fall he had after his great season, but I think he's an underrated quarterback. I think that's going to come off weird because people are going to think I think he's top 5. No, he's not top 10 either, but I think he's right in that 12, 13 top half of quarterbacks in the league, and most people think of him as a bottom tier quarterback. I think we've kind of exhausted the quarterback discussion. Basically, just to give a quick recap, if you're in the top 10, go get one of those top 4 quarterbacks. If not, if free agency is pretty bare, you're going to have to look for a trade option.
Yeah, I don't think we've exhausted it because you could definitely talk about it for days, just breaking down each team that's in that need. But in the interest of time, we'll move on. And so some of the free agent running backs, it's actually a pretty interesting free agent class. We've got Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, Chris Carson, Kenyon Drake, Todd Gurley, Philip Lindsay, James Conner, Mike Davis, Marlon Mack. And then in the draft, you've got a pretty promising class with Najee Harris and Travis Etienne at the top, and then guys like Javonte Williams, Kenneth Gainwell, Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, Chuba Hubbard. So what would you be doing at the running back position if you were a team that needed an upgrade?
I mean, the running back position is really interesting. I think the past few years we've seen good free agent talent at the running back position. So I would target Aaron Jones. But
you would pay Aaron Jones.
Depends on how much money you're going to have to pay him. I mean, if he's looking for a lot of money, and I feel like a lot of these free agent running backs are, Aaron Jones is probably going to be looking for top running back money. Chris Carson probably top running back money. I'd stay far away from Todd Gurley. It's unfortunate, but his prime's passed. The injuries have caught up with him. So, I'm going to steer towards the draft again, just because of the low amount of money you have to commit to a running back when you take them in the draft. And, I like taking those fresh legs. You see it time and time again. Rookie running backs, second-year running backs, they really explode onto the scene. I mean, you saw it this year with multiple guys. So I think with running backs, you should always steer towards the draft because it's going to be cheaper. And, odds are they're going to be good as good or better than the free agents.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with you. I would not pay Aaron Jones. I mean, no disrespect to Aaron Jones. He's a top 10 running back in the league, but he's going to be commanding way too much money that I'm not comfortable to give that to a running back, especially with some of his injury history. Leonard Fournette had a great playoff stretch. We've seen Chris Carson, Kenyon Drake produce in stretches, but I cannot pay any significant money to any of those running backs. I think that if I'm a team in the draft range to take Najee Harris, that's absolutely what I'm doing. He's a future top 5 running back in the NFL for me. But one intriguing option for me would be, if I'm not in that draft range, I would be looking to sign Marlon Mack or Philip Lindsay, because I think that they're going to be really cheap. There's not many teams that need running backs. They're coming off of injury-riddled seasons. They're going to be really, really cheap. If you can get them and then pair them with a guy you take on day 2, Javonte Williams, Kenneth Gainwell, Michael Carter, these guys all fit the bill. If you can make that combo of that cheap veteran free agent that has had productive stretches and has some talent, and that promising rookie running back, I think that would be an extremely cheap but very effective option for us handling the running back situation in this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's a really intriguing idea. Obviously, the NFL is kind of split with running backs. There's no real in between. I think you see the teams that have the top 5, top 6 running backs in the league, and they have a workhorse running back. I'm thinking of Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon before he tore his ACL. But then outside of those top 5, top 6, you have a true running back by committee. So I think the idea you brought up is really interesting of, let's bring in a free agent running back and pair them with a rookie running back and maybe sign that free agent for 3 years. And then you can let him split the carries with a rookie running back. And then year 2 and year 3, let that rookie running back rise to the top of the running back room. And then you have that rookie for 2-3 more years. Maybe you can franchise tag him, get another year out of him, and then let that guy walk in free agency, sign in a new free agent running back, and draft a new rookie. So I think that's a really intriguing idea. I think you're going to start to see teams kind of gear more towards doing that unless they have, a top 5, top 6 running back on their hands, which is, I think, what we both see in Najee Harris.
Yeah, I agree. And to move on to the wide receiver class, so it's set to be a really talented wide receiver class, but I think that guys like Allen Robinson and Kenny Golladay might end up being franchise tagged. So in terms of being on the open market, we might be looking at Chris Godwin, T.Y. Hilton, Corey Davis, Will Fuller, Juju Smith-Schuster. And then in the draft, we know we have a really talented draft class in Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman, Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney. So the list goes on and on. It really does. And so for me, I I think this is pretty simple. I don't want to pay any of these receivers. There's none of them that I outside of Robinson and Galladay, who I would be tagging if I were their teams. I would not want to give anything upwards of 10 million to any of these other receivers because it's such a talented, deep wide receiver class in the draft. So that's my opinion on handling that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think the draft class at wide receiver is way too deep to warrant paying a free agent wide receiver $15 million a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Money. So I think the only reason I would sign a free agent for big money is if I'm a contending team that says, hey, we need a really good number 2 wide receiver and we need them to be ready next year.
But would you be willing to pay like for Chris Godwin 18, 19 mil a year, or for Corey Davis 14, 15? Would you be willing to pay that?
Yeah, if I'm a team that's a Super Bowl contender right now, and I think all we need to get over the hump is a really good number 2 receiver or even a number 1 receiver, I would go out and pay him, front load the money these next 2 years. Because if we're being honest, guys like Chris Godwin, and either Kenny Galladay or Allen Robinson, if they aren't tagged, they're going to be better year 1 than the day 2, day 3 wide receivers. So if I'm a contending team and I say I need a wide receiver that's going to be productive the first year, second year I have them, then I go with one of the high price free agents. If I'm a lower tier team, I'm thinking the Jets have been rumored to be in on wide receivers. No way I sign a wide receiver in free agency. The team's not even ready to contend yet. So that's when I'd go with the younger guys.
But if you're a team in the 20s, which is most of these teams that are like that one step away from really being able to win a Super Bowl, why can't Rashad Bateman or Kadarius Toney be that missing piece as the wide receiver too to take your offense over the hump? I think they're talented prospects, very different prospects, but definitely Rashad Bateman is a big physical, good route runner, and Kadarius Toney is extremely elusive and fast. I think they can just be a much cheaper option to resolve that issue. Why pay Corey Davis 14, 15 a year when you can get Rashad Bateman or Kadarius Toney at the back end of the first round?
Yeah, I think if one of those 2 were available, then I would take them. But the thing is, free agency is before the draft. So do you want to risk, maybe missing out on those 2 guys and then saying, well, we don't have the receiver that we wanted, and now we're going to have to rely on a rookie to step up big year 1?
I think it's such a deep class that you could take if you do miss out on one of them, and I think that you probably won't if you're in the 20s. I think Rashad Bateman is not getting anywhere near the love he should be. I think you can rely on the depth of the class and take a couple of shots on in rounds 2 to 4, and I think you could definitely get that explosive element there. This draft definitely does not lack anything in terms of explosiveness of the wide receiver position, and we've seen with what the Chiefs have done that can really get you so far. So even beyond Kadarius Toney, you have guys like Dwayne Eskridge, you have Tutu Atwell. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of him. Anthony Schwartz, like there's so many guys that if you were to take just a couple of them, even if they're not the most refined products, they have that game breaking speed that could even if you're missing out on that real wide receiver too, you're still getting that added element into your offense.
Yeah, okay, so I can't really think of a team right off the top of my head, but let's do a hypothetical here, right? If you were a team heading into free agency and your offensive line is set, you had your quarterback, you have a running back, you have a really good defense, but you need that number 1, number 2 wide receiver.
Let's take the Green Bay Packers. They could use that number 2 next to Devontae Adams.
Perfect. So if you're the Packers, they're sitting at 29.
Yeah,
29. So let's say it's a 50-50 chance. Well, Tony's going to be gone by 29.
He will be gone.
So let's say it's a 50-50 chance that Bateman's there at 29.
Agreed, yeah.
So they're heading into free agency saying, okay, we have a 50-50 shot at getting Rashad Bateman. Do we want to risk not getting Bateman? Or do we want to just, let's go spend money on a receiver like Chris Godwin? I mean, having Chris Godwin and Devontae Adams together on an offense, what would you do in that situation? If it was me, I would say I'm not taking the risk. I'm going to sign Chris Godwin. If Bateman's there, great, we'll take him. Then we have 3.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I think that there are few teams in which I would be giving that top dollar free agent, but the Packers are definitely one because they are really sitting at the very back end of that first round. So if you're in like the early 20s, I wouldn't do it. But if you're that in the late 20s, because you're right, if Bateman does happen to be there, holy crap! Like that, the trio of Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, Rashad Bateman would be dominant. Like I think that would be the step that takes the Packers over the hump and wins them a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're the Packers, why not do both? Let's say, okay, we'll go sign Chris Godwin, and if Bateman's there, if some reason Tony's there, and then if they're not, I would go in the second, third round and get somebody too.
Oh yeah, Austin Watkins, Cade Johnson, Harris Marshall. Like there's so many guys. So I totally agree. Do you want to move on to the tight end position now?
Yeah, sure. So the tight ends,
It's
like
bare.
but the tight end position's bare in the NFL. You have
Exactly.
you have your top 5 guys, and then you have guys that will show up for a week, and then you don't hear their name again for another like 6. So the notable free agents: Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Rob Gronkowski, Jared Cook, and Robert Tonyan. So not much to go with in free agency.
And I think it's even less in the draft. I'm going to be honest. I think that outside of Kyle Pitts, maybe Pat Freiermuth would return the same value as those names you listed. Outside of that, probably nobody else. So really, I think when I was looking at this and preparing for this episode, really assessing that tight end situation, that really reinforced my belief that maybe getting Kyle Pitts really early might be the way to go, because it's so valuable to have that tight end that can really stretch the field and create separation, because so few teams have one. You need to use Kyle Pitts right. You like that. I'm so afraid. It's hard for me to grade Kyle Pitts because I almost feel like taking into consideration the possibility that he doesn't get used right, because there's so few tight ends that are used like that. But I think he should be used exactly how Darren Waller is with the Raiders, where you're really limiting the amount of time he needs to spend blocking and maximizing his ability to win one-on-one as a size and speed mismatch down the seam.
Yeah, I agree. To me, I think Kyle Pitts you could use him as a wide receiver. I mean, if you're in a situation where you don't know how to use him correctly, you just use him as a wide receiver. I mean, he's so dynamic. He's a great athlete, and he's going to create those mismatches, almost every single time. He's way too big for corners, way too fast for linebackers. But like you said, other than Kyle Pitts, there's nobody that's going to impact you year 1, year 2. A guy that I like is Tommy Tremble, but he is not ready at all.
Yeah, he's a developmental prospect.
Correct. He's a guy that I think 2-3 years down the road, he could be one of the best tight ends out of this draft class. I think he has potential to be better than everyone besides Pitts. But I think Pitts is a special talent. I think he's the best tight end prospect to come out in years. I think he's better than Hawkinson, OJ Howard. He's all the guys that have been regarded as the top tight end in the draft class. I think he's better than all of them. But other than that, if we take Pitts away, it's like the tight end class last year. There's not a lot coming out.
Yeah, I think that. So really, to sum it up, I think in the tight end position, for me, it's do nothing or draft Kyle Pitts. I don't think you should be spending some of your salary cap or one of your draft picks, one of your early draft picks on this tight end position. Go reinforce your team somewhere else and bite the bullet with what you have, unless you are in position to draft Kyle Pitts, because in that maybe 6 to 12 range is probably where he's going to go. He's a very intriguing option.
Yeah, and before we move on to any other position, these past few years we haven't seen really good tight ends come out of the draft at all. So what do you think is causing that problem?
Well, that's a big question to tackle. I think it's really it's usage. I think that tight ends are way less plug and play than any other position, and very few offenses are going to take the time to completely tailor their offense to that tight end. I'm going to take Evan Ingram as an example. I think he's a really talented tight end. He's as an athlete so superior to so many tight ends, and he could really be so dangerous if you were to flex him out wide, if you were to really consistently align him against some linebackers that don't have those movement skills. Yet he's being asked to be a traditional tight end. That's not what he does. So I think that he's an example of why there's such little tight end hits in the draft, because they're drafted by a general manager who sees the potential, but then the offense is not adapted to their skill set, and so they don't realize it, because there are only 2 tight ends in this league right now who are elite at receiving and at blocking. That's Travis Kelce and that's George Kittle. Those are the 2 guys where you can actually just plug and play them and they'll be elite. All the other guys, you have to tailor them to their skills. That's what the Raiders have done with Waller with great success. And other teams should really be looking at what the Raiders did with Waller and try to do the same thing, because I think it's just such a shame that the tight ends are in this league are not being used right. And I think that would be my answer to your question.
Yeah. So, and it goes the same thing in college, right? So if most NFL coaches don't know how to use a tight end properly, you got to think most college coaches don't either, because you think the best coaches are going to be at the NFL level. So I think, that's, like you said, that's the issue. College coaches see these tight ends with, great athleticism. They're dynamic receivers that can create mismatches, but the college coaches and the college offensive coordinators don't know how to properly use them. And then
100%.
When you see a guy like Kyle Pitts, who is in a pretty pro-style offense at Florida, with a coach that knows how to use him and show off his skills, I think if you look at the best tight ends in the league right now, I think, the 3, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Darren Waller, they were all later round picks. And that's because in college, their coaches didn't know how to use them. And Darren Waller with the Ravens didn't know how to use them, and they have a good head coach in John Harbaugh.
George Kittle was predominantly a blocking tight end in college because they had Noah Fant to receive, so they decided George Kittle's a blocking tight end. So I think that supports your point.
So I think the reason that we see the best tight ends come from later rounds is because they weren't utilized correctly. So all the coaches that don't know how to use tight ends just overlook them because they're not being – they can't see what they can actually do. And then you have the coaches that are really smart, know how to use tight ends. Look at the top 3 tight ends in the league. Kyle Shanahan's the head coach. John Gruden's the head coach. Andy Reid's the head coach. 3 brilliant offensive minds. They know how to use tight ends. So I think, we're going to continue to see, besides Kyle Pitts, I think we're going to see the top tight ends with the elite traits come from later rounds, because it's going to be the coaches say, oh, I know how to use him, but no one else does, so I can wait in the draft to take him. And I'm just going to slip in a name here that I mentioned earlier, Tommy Tremble. I think he shows those traits. I think it's going to be a couple of years, but I think in the right system, he can be really, really good at the next level.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has. There's just a lot of untapped potential, both at the college and at the NFL level, and it really takes that brilliant head coach to be able to use that tight end correctly and develop him into a star. And we've seen that too a few times in the NFL. So I hope Kyle Pitts is able to buck the trend and somebody really uses him the right way, because he has all of that potential. So now to move on to the offensive line. And the free agents we have are Brendan Sheriff, Joe Tooney, Trent Williams, Corey Linsley, Alejandro Villanueva, John Feliciano, David Andrews, Taylor Moton, Russell Okun, Ted Karras. And we know there's a very talented offensive line class in this upcoming draft. So how would you be assessing your offensive line needs in this offseason?
So I think I'm going to reiterate. Well, you know what? Yeah, we're going to reiterate what we said for most of these positions. Go through the draft. I think, Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, Elijah Vera Tucker. I mean, those are 4 really, really good prospects. And they're all going to be round 1. The only thing is, they're going to be the top half of round 1. But I don't think, that's that's too big of an issue because then you have, the second tier guys at offensive tackle, guys like Sam Cosmi, Jalen Mayfield, Alex Leatherwood, Liam Eichenberg, Tevin Jenkins, and I think this is a really, really talented offensive tackle class. But the only thing is, if I was a team in the second half of the first round, I think the guys that are going to go in the second round don't have everything put together yet. I think they have a lot of potential, but they're not ready to be impact starters day one. So I'd say the top 15, go take a tackle. The second half of the first round, if offensive tackle, offensive line is one of your biggest needs, go sign a guy in free agency.
Yeah, I have to say this is a rare year in which if you have a need on the offensive line, like many teams do, you're actually in a good position to address it. That's so rare. Because I'm looking, there's a few guys on that free agent list where I do want to pay them. They're just elite players. Brandon Sheriff, Corey Lindsley, David Andrews. These are guys that I'm paying them. I'm paying them because they are elite NFL players. They are established. If I have that cap, I'm immediately giving it to them, regardless of where I am in the draft order. Because if you have the opportunity to snap one of those guys, plug him in for the length of his contract, get that elite play, that veteran play that whole time, you should do it. And then other than that, you got to be taking advantage of the draft class too. Because as you said, that group of four is really good. And if I'm in a position to take one of them, I'm absolutely doing it. And there's some good developmental prospects beyond that. And you didn't really address the interior offensive line, but I love this interior offensive line class. You've got Wyatt Davis, Creed Humphrey, Josh Myers, Deontay Brown, the Senior Bowl star, and Quinn Minor. I think you've really, especially if you're interior offensive line, you should wait for the draft. But my bottom line is there should be none of the mediocre offensive linemen getting these big contracts like we see every year. I remember like Halipulivati Vaitai. I butchered that name, but I know he got double digits per year over a 5-year deal. And that's just, there should not be any of that this year. Take only the offensive linemen and free agents that really do deserve that money, because there are a few of them. And other than that, look to this really talented draft class.
Yeah, I don't mean to stop our offensive line conversation, but we just had one of the viewers chime in a little bit on the tight end discussion, and that really puts what we were talking about, summarizing into a good sentence. College offenses aren't tight end friendly, and that's because coaches don't know how to use them. They know how to use explosive wide receivers and explosive running backs. I mean, they know how to say, all right, quarterback, throw the ball 50 yards down the field, but the tight end position is really, really, really hard to use in this day and age of both college and the NFL.
Yeah, the spread offenses are just really not tailored to tight ends, and they're very popular in the college game, where you really spread out these wide receivers and running backs, get them into space, use their explosiveness, and that's exactly right.
Yeah, so just to hop back, talking about the offensive line a little bit, I know you mentioned the top tier guys that are kind of in their prime, but I think two other guys that I would be interested in signing if I was in need of an offensive line and if I was a contender, a guy like Trent Williams, he still showed that he's a really good tackle. I wouldn't pay him top tier money because he's getting old, but if I needed a guy, for the next 2-3 years and I didn't want to wait for one of the rookies to develop, Trent Williams would be a great option. I think even Alejandro Villanueva would be a good option. He's not at the talent level that he was in the prime of the Steelers. Great offensive line, but I think he could be a great guy if you're in need of a tackle to protect your quarterback. And like we said with the wide receivers, if that's one of your last pieces and you don't have the most cap space, I would go sign one of those two guys before I look to the draft.
Yeah, and so just to move on to the defensive tackle position, I really hope you don't need a defensive tackle this offseason. If I'm going to be honest, the free agent class has Ndamukong Suh, who's getting old in age, Sheldon Rankins, who's a solid piece, but nothing special, Larry Ogunjobi, Daquan Jones, and then in the draft, you have a lot of raw prospects that have upside, but that really need a lot of development, like Christian Barmore, Davion Nixon, Jalen Twyman, a guy that I think should be mentioned in that group because he has so much upside, Darius Stills. So I think that if you really are lacking on the defensive tackle position, try to get those edge rushers, edge defenders that can stop the run, linebackers that can stop the run, and that can both those positions can really get to the passer. Because I really don't think there's anybody you can sign or draft that can in 2021 give you really good play at the defensive tackle position.
Yeah, and I agree with you. The defensive line is not. It might be the if you're combining free agency and the draft, it's the weakest position. It's just you know, I mean, I wouldn't sign any of those free agents. And then in the draft, I wouldn't touch any of those guys in the first round. And there's a lot of potential, but I think there's a low floor.
Yeah.
And we had someone ask a question about the offensive tackle Orlando Brown for the Ravens, who actually he's not going to be a free agent, but he's been pretty vocal about wanting to be traded now that because he was the right tackle. And then they moved him over to left tackle after an injury, and he performed really well. And now he's saying he wants to be traded. He wants them to either keep him at left tackle, which they're not going to do. They have Ronnie Stanley, or be traded. And I think he'll eventually be traded. I think a team's going to have to give up a high pick to be able to get him, though.
I agree. I think he will be traded because he's really been fierce in his demands to play left tackle, and Ronnie Stanley is too good to dislodge him from there. And so I think he will end up being traded, and it probably will be for a really high pick. So that's an interesting storyline that's not been talked about very much to keep an eye on, because that could potentially be for maybe a late first rounder.
Yeah, I think if I was a team, maybe in the 20s and offensive line was my biggest need, I would look at trading for him, give up that first round pick, because the talent that you're going to get at that point in the draft, even though this is a really good offensive line class, I'd rather give up that first to take Orlando Brown.
100%. And moving on to the edge pass rusher position, JJ Watt, I think that he's separate from the rest of these guys. He's a special case. He's incredible career in Houston. Just mutually agreed to get released. I think if you're a contender, you've got to go try to snap him up, because not only his play on the field will help you, but he's going to be that piece in the locker room, given that veteran leadership, and he's hell bent on winning that ring. That you've got to try to go get him. And then outside of that, there's Leonard Williams, who will probably re-sign with the Giants, Jadeveon Clowney, Justin Houston, Yannick Ngakoue, Ryan Kerrigan, Matt Judon, Bud Dupree, Shaq Barrett, Solomon Thomas. For me, there's one name on that list I would pay, and nobody else. I would pay Shaq Barrett, because I think he's one of the most underrated pass rushers in the league, and because his undrafted free agent label will always stick with him. And I mean, he won't get the respect that he deserves. I think he's a top edge rusher, but the other guys aren't, and they probably will get that money. I've heard Matt Judon is looking for $20 million a year, and he's a good player, but there's no chance I would pay anywhere near that number for any of these guys when I can go to this draft class, which in my opinion is underrated. People are bashing this edge rusher class, but for me, I think Kwity Paye is an excellent prospect. Jalen Phillips has all the traits, and then outside of that, you have some really nice potential in Gregory Rousseau, Azeez Ojulari, Jason Owe, Patrick Jones. There's so many guys that you can really take a shot on, and that could end up being better than any of these guys that you would be paying this top dollar for.
Yeah, so my issue with the edge rushing class in the draft this year is that I feel like a lot of the guys have really high potential, but a really low floor. I think a guy like Gregory Rousseau is a guy that you could look at. He has extremely high potential. He has all the traits. He's super long. He's super explosive, but he hasn't tied everything together. And I think you could say that for all of these guys. Jason Owa, Azeez Ojulari, I think those are two guys that, have really good traits, but not everything's tied together. So it's kind of tough because, like you said, the only guy that would be interested in paying in top money in free agency is Shaq Barrett. But if I was a team that needed an edge rusher, now, because we see edge rushers so important, I'm not sure that I would go in the draft unless Kwity Paye is a guy that falls, or, just because they're not – I don't think they're going to be great year one. And Walter, one of our viewers, is talking about Carlos Basham. I think Basham is underrated. I think, his name has really flown under the radar.
Yeah.
He's a guy that I think we might see rise. But I agree. I think Basham's a really safe pick. He might not have the highest potential that, Rousseau or Phillips has, but I think he's a guy that behind Pay, I think Pay's a really, really safe pick. I know you're really high on Pay. I think, Basham might be another really good pick. And, he's not really in the end of the first round conversation right now, but I think
should be.
he should be. And I think he could be by April. And one guy that I think, if you're a contender, you might target is a potential cut in Von Miller. I think he is not where he was when he won Super Bowl MVP, but I still think that he can give you a really good presence off the edge if you need him for the next 2 or even 1 years. I think he's a good veteran option to sign.
Yeah, I think when it just comes down to it, even putting this draft class aside, in principle, I am not paying anywhere near the money that Clowney and Gakwe, Judon, Dupree are going to be commanding. And so I would be looking to draft like a Jalen Phillips or a Azeez Ojulari or a Carlos Basham in the back half of the first round. I think those would all be good value. And moving on to the linebackers, so the free agents include Levante David, KJ Wright, who will probably re-sign with Seattle, Avery Williamson, Denzel Perryman, Jared Davis, and for me, none of those guys are except for Levante David. I think if you're a contender, you've got to be chasing after him. If you're Tampa, if you want to repeat, you've got to keep him because keeping him next to Devin White is just an absolute force. The other guys are really run defenders. They don't offer you much in terms of pass rushers. And if you look in the draft, Micah Parsons, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Zaven Collins, Joseph Osai, Chaz Surratt, these guys have such serious pass rushing potential. So for me, this one is the most no-brainer positional group in terms of this discussion. I'm targeting the linebacker position in the draft because I can get these solid run defenders who also have really high potential as pass rushers, which you cannot get in this free agent class.
Yeah, I think, you're talking about solid run defenders in the draft. Micah Parsons, Zaven Collins, Chaz Surratt, those are 3 guys that I really like. I think Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he's a really great player. I don't think he's the best run defender, but it's similar to what we were talking about the tight end position, right? You have to know how to use JOK for him to reach his potential. But I think he's a really, really intriguing player. He's got that sideline to sideline speed. He's undersized. He's almost like a hybrid linebacker safety. And kind of like that Isaiah Simmons from last year. And I think being put in the right situation, I think he could be really, really good. But like you said, I think, if we're looking at free agents, KJ Wright and Levante David are probably the best 2, but Wright's going to probably re-sign with Seattle. I know they expressed interest in that. Levante David, I'm not sure if Tampa will be able to re-sign him. I've heard people talk about, he's looking for like 12, 13 million. And if I'm Tampa, I don't think they have that much cap space. I would rather put that in other positions because you do have Devin White. And I think if I'm Tampa, I would actually let Levante David walk.
If I have to choose between Shaq Barrett and Levante David, it's definitely Shaq Barrett. Yeah.
Totally. Any money you say, okay, we have to pay Shaq Barrett. Whatever we have left over, we can give to Levante David. But they're also going to have to re-sign Rob Gronkowski. I don't think it's going to be a lot of money, but it's still money. If I was Tampa, I would say, you know what, Levante David, thank you for everything you did. You were with us when we sucked. You helped us win the championship. You're a huge part of it. But I think it would be best. We're not going to give you the money that you're looking for. You would have to take a discount to stay with Tampa. So I say let him walk. And I think one of these guys at 32 could be an intriguing option. I think, Joseph Osai, he might – there's been talk about him going, like in the 20s, but that's kind of died down a little bit. I think Chaz Surratt, that might be a little early for him to go. But I think if you're Tampa and linebacker's your biggest need and you're not picking again until 64, I think, picking Surratt at 32 or trading back into the early second round and picking him. And, like Walter said, he's so intriguing. He only played linebacker for over a season, but his football IQ was so high because he played quarterback before that.
So I have to say, especially for the Bucks, if they can get him at 64 trade up, having Devin White next to Chaz Surratt in terms of the athleticism, the sideline to sideline speed, the pass rushing ability, the coverage ability, you would be having 2 uber athletes who are also really coming into their own as football players. Obviously, Devin White is already a top linebacker, and I think Chaz Surratt has such high potential too, and he'd be able to learn from Devin White, and his job would be much easier with playing next to him. I think that they should definitely be looking to target Chaz Surratt on day 2.
Yeah, just to talk about this linebacker class a little bit, it's a class that I really like the more I watch it.
Yes.
I think obviously Micah Parsons, we like his play. There's some questionable off this field character issues, but he's still a really good player. But then I think you have guys like JOK, Zaven Collins, who I really like, Chaz Surratt, I also like. I just think it's a really good, really underrated linebacker class.
Agreed. And to move on to the corner class, this is a class I find extremely underrated. Because I think that Patrick Surtain and Caleb Farley, I wouldn't call them underrated. I think they're being rated as they should be. They're kind of those guys who the early teens could slide into the top 10. I know that the Broncos and the Cowboys are really popular landing spots for them. But I really think after that is where you can really get talented corners who are going to be good starters in this league. And I think Eric Stokes is one. I think Greg Newsome is one. I think Kelvin Joseph is one. I think all three of those are actually they all have first round grades from me. I think they're just really sticky man coverage guys who can stay in phase and really cover any of these receivers. So especially looking at the free agent class in which you've got a lot of older guys who are way past their prime in terms of like Patrick Peterson, AJ Boye, Richard Sherman, Josh Norman, Jason McCourty. None of these guys are good starters anymore. I'm 100% looking to the draft class. I would say the one guy that I'd be intrigued by in free agency is Xavier Rhodes because he had a really nice bounce back season. I think he's a guy that you'd want to look into him and see what kind of money he's going to be asking for and see if that's manageable.
Yeah, I think Xavier Rhodes was really good in Minnesota. He had that one down year. They got rid of him. He had a really nice bounce back season with the Colts. So if I were a contender, if I were a team that needed a cornerback one, I would go sign Xavier Rhodes. But other than that, like you said, I think it's a really deep cornerback class. I don't think there's a top end, top 5 talent at cornerback. But I think Surtain and Farley are two good options in the teens. And I think, like you said, I think even a guy like Paulson Adebo, I think he's a guy that I think has some potential. And I think a guy that was talked about a lot before the season as possibly the best cornerback in the draft. And then he had a very poor season. I think you know where I'm going with this. Shaun Wade. I don't think he's a first-round pick, but I think – he was so high before the draft. He had such a poor season and as an outside cornerback that his stock is just dropping. And I think he's a guy that you could get for good value just because of how far his draft stock is dropping. I think he could be a really good slot corner at the next level.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you. I think he's a safety at the next level. I don't think he has the coverage skills to be a good cornerback either on the perimeter or in the slot at the next level. I think if as a safety, given his experience at corner, he'd be good in coverage for a safety. And what I see from him is he's a good run defender. He takes good angles. He's physical. He's a solid tackler. I think he has a lot of upside as a safety. If you were to move him to safety, then I think you could definitely be getting good value there. And to move on to that final position group, the safety class, the free agents are Anthony Harris, Justin Simmons, who is an absolute bona fide star. And I just read a report today how the Broncos are going to be bringing him back, probably tagging him for the second season in a row. He's going to be staying in Denver. So then there's Jaquiski Tart, Deron Harmon, Daniel Sorensen, Jalen Mills, Keanu Neal, Marcus May. And in the draft, you've got guys like Trayvon Moehrig, Javon Holland, Hamza Nasruddin, Richie Grant, who really has his stock rising after his Senior Bowl performance. I really don't like any of these safety options, I'm going to be honest. I'm really low on this draft class. I don't think any of them are the guys you should be taking in the top 50. Trayvon Moehrig is really explosive and fast and has some coverage skills, but he's not a good tackler, and he's not good enough in run defense. I can't have him as the last line of defense if he's such an inconsistent tackler. And Javon Holland doesn't really have a special trait for me. And So just to sum up, I think I'd be trying to get these bargain deals in free agency. I think I'd be looking at maybe Marcus May. I'd be trying to see what I can get for him, because there's no really great option in either free agency or the draft.
Yeah, I think we've gotten down to our last positional group, and I think this will be the one where I'm stressing the most of I'm going to go free agency in this for safety. I think Anthony Harris, like you said, the Broncos are going to tag Justin Simmons again. He's a really good option. I think Jaquiski Tart could be a good option. I think all these guys that we mentioned as free agents, I think they're just better than the guys in the draft. So I think regardless of, if you're a contender or if you're a team that's, just rebuilding, I think you need a safety. You got to go in free agency this year. Like you said, I don't see anyone in the draft that's really good. Some of them, they have special skills. You mentioned Morig, and like you said, Holland, he's kind of okay all around. I don't think he's going to be somebody that's super special. Richie Grant might be an intriguing option to look at, especially after his Senior Bowl. Another guy who's really good, really athletic, Andre Cisco, but his tackling is just horrendous. It's really thin on the draft, that safety. So I definitely have to go free agency with this one.
Yeah, all right. A very understandable stance, and that wraps up our episode going over all these positional groups. I'm really excited for this offseason, where there's going to, especially at the quarterback position with the whole carousel, the draft season is really ramping up right into gear. So stay with us, where it will be broadcasting live every Monday at 8:30, and you'll be able to find us if you miss the live broadcast on Bull Take Scouting at YouTube. We post all of our episodes the next day. We're going to be here right with you, covering everything related to the draft up through the draft, and it's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, I think, before we ended this, I just wanted to quickly, summarize, some of the conclusions that we came to with going the free agency route or the draft route for each position. I think overall, you're going to have to look to the draft, and I think that's how it should be. I think to build your team, you should look at
build your team through the draft.
And then as a contender, you say, okay, there's some top-tier free agents at, a position where we think is our last piece to become a Super Bowl contender. That's when you go through free agency. And I think, that's kind of what we touched on, with wide receiver, maybe you go through free agency, offensive line. Obviously, we ended with safety, but every team's focus should be through the draft. And, if you don't want to take a risk on, getting the player that you want in the draft, that's when you resort to free agency. Or, if you have some of these top-tier offensive linemen come up, that's another free agency option. But, reiterate, you build your team through the draft. No team is built for sustained success through free agency.
Totally agree. Free agency is, as we said this several times throughout the show, we mentioned several times, if you're a contender and you need that missing piece. And given that we reiterated that several times, I think that's really the lens through which you should be focusing on free agency. It's only if you're that contender that really needs that final piece of that veteran established play to plug him in and go for a title.
Yep. So I think that about wraps up our podcast. It's a long one. Thanks to those of you that listened all the way through. I hope you gained some insightful information. I hope, this got the wheels turning a little bit of some interesting conversations and things to think about as we head into free agency and the draft. So thanks for listening. Like Kosta said, Bull Take Scouting on Instagram, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast, and go check us out on Twitter, Bull Take Scout. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week.